And we'll kick this off. Okay, good morning. Thank you all for joining us today. We'd like to welcome you to a joint webinar by Innova and Meridian Strategic Services and NUARI, Norwich University Applied Research Institutes. Today we are recording this webinar just to make that known. We are also joined by two panelists, Heidi Fessler from Innova and Seamus Leary from Meridian. And my name is Jakin Hayes and I'm from NUARI. Again, this is going to be a very relaxed information session webinar. It's noon here on the East Coast. So if you want to sit back and have your lunch and just listen to what we have to talk about, that'd be wonderful. We will be making these slides available in PDF form after this session. Also, since this is being recorded, we will provide a link to a few different channels where you could view the contents of this session following the meeting. So it may be a day or two after we send that link out. I want to stress that the two most important people on this webinar are Heidi and Seamus. I'm going to kind of be playing. I'm going to be playing back up here. I'm going to kind of. I'll be working the slides, and I have a couple slides at the end that'll just be going over what is probably going to be the obvious to most of you. And overall, I guess we just like to, in this webinar to stress preparedness. It's gonna get a pretty deep dive, and you'll hear Heidi interject when Seamus is talking. I'll interject when Heidi's talking. So there's gonna be a lot of back and forths. If you do have any questions, please feel free to drop them into the chat over there on the side. Heidi will be monitoring those, so she'll break in from time to time with a question from one of you if you all have it. So again, relax, sit back, take a listen. We're going to start off with Heidi and then move over to Seamus and then back to Heidi and then back to Seamus and then to me. And then that'll be at the end of the webinar. So a lot of jumping around. So let's start off with Heidi. I'm going to start sharing the slide deck and we will begin there. Again, thank you all for joining us. Heidi, it's all yours.
You can advance. So thanks for joining us today. If you attended our after the first 24 hours and saw that presentation, you now are at the after the 24 hours. So today we're going to be talking about after 24 hours, after the panic, now the process. So this is a bit of a depiction of the process from preparation all the way through post-incident activity. Obviously, we haven't talked about really preparation, but it's kind of meshed throughout everything we talk about anyway. But really today, as you can tell from the arrows, we're really talking about right after the issue occurs, not the first 24 hours, but now you're getting down to the brass tacks. You need to know what to do next and how you move forward. So how do we get started with the process? Well, Seamus is going to talk to you about that emergency process that you're going to be implementing. Next slide. Seamus.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Seamus Leary. I am the president of Meridian Strategic Services. We are a crisis management and risk mitigation consulting company. Prior to starting Meridian, I was a federal coordinating officer with FEMA, and I was also a county emergency management director in Orange County, New York. So I got a little bit of experience on the emergency management side of the house here. So one thing I'll kind of set the table with is what the emergency management cycle. And it's this is a cycle that's adopted all over the country and actually in several other countries. But essentially, it breaks down to 4 phases. Mitigation is how do you prevent something from happening? How do you limit its impact? Preparedness, how do you get ready for something? And response, which I'm going to talk a little bit about today, is how do we respond to an event once it's occurred? And also a huge part is recovery. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to go over a few points here to talk about how do we respond to emergencies. Now, this could be a widespread regional natural disaster like a hurricane or an earthquake, or it can be a very localized event such as a cybersecurity event that happens to your organization that's highly impactful to your organization and your stakeholders, but may not affect the wider community. Both can be really, really significant and really important, but many of the ways we manage a crisis are the same. So one of the things that we have to do is have a process to manage crises and emergencies, and we have to have that in place prior to an event happens. Nothing can derail a response effort more than waiting to something to happen in order to figure it out, quote unquote. So a couple of things I'll just go over here is, one is getting situational awareness. So what is that? That's trying to figure out and capture what happened. Why are we here? What caused us to be here? What's happening right now, and what may happen, in the future. And I'm going to talk a minute about operational periods. It's a little bit of emergency management jargon, but the old analogy of how do you eat an elephant? It's one bite at a time, right? Same thing with response and recovery operations. They can last for hours, days, weeks, months, years even. So how do it's just an ability to break it up. And the more complex and fast paced, the narrower that operational period is. For instance, is it 12 hours? Is it 24 hours? Is it a week? Or is it 30 days? So once we start this operational period, we got to figure out what's actually going on and what could happen, and what's the impact of what's happening to us. What happened to our organization, what's happening, and what's the impacts going on, going into the future here. And we also have to get a hold of what resources do we have on site? What are on the ground to solve whatever problem that we're experiencing? And what shortfalls do we have? What do we need to order? What do we need to have on place and to solve some of our problems? One of the tools in our toolbox in order to help us effectively respond to a disaster or an emergency or a crisis is having an incident action plan. It's really critical to have a plan prior to an event happening, because it allows us in blue sky times and calmer heads to figure out what our processes are going to be. We establish relationships with our internal and external stakeholders and figure out how are we going to respond to an event. But just as Mike Tyson famously said, no plan, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. Same thing with disasters, crises, and emergencies, in that the disaster or the bad guys, in case of a man-made event, may have a say in your response. So we have to be able to have a plan that incorporates not only our pre-event planning, but based on the information we've collected about the event that we're experiencing, how do we create a plan that's applicable to right now and tomorrow, the next day, etc. So this, having an incident action plan promotes information sharing amongst all of the stakeholders, both internal and external. And also one of the key things, and I'm sure Heidi would find this important, is it documents our response efforts. So not only does it, so for our after action report or review process, after the event is over, did we do well? Did we not do well? What did we do badly? What could we improve on? It also helps with regulatory bodies. It helps with other things that might come down the pike weeks, months, years later, because especially in response time, time gets really compressed and it's hard to remember what you did when. And I've had many disasters where I don't even remember, 2 days ago, let alone what I did, 3 months ago. So, having everything documented in an instant action plan is great. It also helps us identify, again, what our resources are, what shortfalls do we have. And it also permits a future planning effort, because if you can, there are sometimes you get too involved in responding to the event and you have no opportunity to plan what you're going to do next. What are we going to do tomorrow? What are we going to do the day after? So having some folks dedicated to thinking about tomorrow while everybody else is scurrying around responding to the event can really help. And it also helps us, having that little bit detachment helps us change our strategy and tactics based on the situation that's going on.
And Seamus, one of the things that I've learned from putting this together with you two is an incident action plan is different than an incident response plan, right? And I've always had an incident response plan, but I love this idea of the incident action plan that Seamus has brought up. And I learn from people every day. And it really does, it's really where the rubber meets the road sort of plan. It's not just one size fits all. I love the fact that you actually take that next step to make it really meaningful to the actual incident that has occurred. I'm going to start employing this.
And you know, and I haven't used a lot of emergency management jargon here, but it's really a core tenet of the National Incident Management System and the Incident Command System, NIMS and ICS. It's bread and butter to emergency responders and public safety folks. The military has their own version, but it's very, very similar. And one of the key components of all this is managing by objective. And what does that mean? What does that mean? Well, that enables us to set goals and objectives for every operational period. So if our operational periods are every 24 hours, we set our objectives for the next 24 hours. We may have strategic goals, sure, those are awesome and great, but what are we going to do today, tomorrow, the next day? These goals need to be achievable and they need to be measurable. We don't want to set goals we can't get to. We get like in the next 12 hours, we're going to make all our problems go away with this event. That might not be realistic, but also we got to be able to measure it, because how do we pivot tactics if we can't measure how well we're doing? And it establishes a unity of effort because everybody knows what they're going to be doing. Like, this is our goals for today. We need to stop this. We need to clean up that. We need to move something from point A to point B. Those are our goals for today. And it allows everybody in the organization and our external stakeholders to know what we're up to for that period of time. So organizing the response. The date, this is a key component because it seems intuitive, but it's not. I've seen a lot of organizations kind of trip up on this, in that they take their day-to-day organization and try to overlay it on the disaster. Their day-to-day organization may be great to manage their daily activities, but when you put the crisis on top of it, they may not be suited to handle the needs of that event. So a lot of times it has to be task organized based on the need of the event. So you may need resources to help one part of your organization one day, and the next day you may need to shift that resource over to another portion of your organization the next day. And you need to have that flexibility to move things around. And you need to be able to change the organization based on the needs. As things get better, maybe you change the organization. Or if things get worse, you can alter it as well.
Seamus, as you said that, it just occurred to me. I think sometimes we think that an organization that suffered one of these incidents, it's going to keep going on doing business as usual while it's managing all that. Really, when you think about it, most companies don't have people sitting around twiddling their thumbs. They're super busy. People are super busy. And so how's the organization supposed to get the day-to-day still, if possible, rolling, and then meet these objectives with the response?
It goes back to exactly the word objectives. You know, the senior leaders and the folks that are actually organizing the response need to sit down and establish those objectives. And part of that objectives is, hey, maybe we don't do this day-to-day activity, so we can shift the resources over to respond to this. It's by having that situational awareness and having that tactical plan, that incident management plan, we can shift the priorities of the organization from day to day if we have to. It's not optimal, but we can. You know, so we might say, hey, we're going to pause on this daily activity because it's not necessary. It's a should do, not a have to do. We're only going to do the have to do's today on our normal business, and we're going to shift all the should do's to another day, if that makes sense. So communications, I know I'm fishing in Jake's pond here a little bit, but I'll talk more on the response side here. In that I've been in a lot of responses. I've been in 25 presidentially declared major disaster declarations. I've been in hundreds of different smaller events, as well as dozens of exercises. Virtually all of them, when you do the after action review process, is the number one point of failure is communication. It's almost always first. We failed to communicate properly. And if you look into it, occasionally it's a technical problem, but the vast majority of the time, it's a process problem. It's the human component of communication. So, you know, we stink at communication. You'll see it public sector, private sector, military. It always circles back there. So we need to be able to communicate up the chain of command and down the chain of command and left and right. So what does that mean? Up the chain of command, it's intuitive. What's going on the ground has to be communicated up to the C-suite, to the chief elected officials. It has to be communicated, or else they can't set policy, they can't set direction, they can't communicate with the public at a macro level of what's going on. That also needs to go down chain of command. That strategic vision and policy and strategy has to get down to the lowest level of the organization, or else how do we respond to something if the folks at the bottom of the organizational chart don't know what the policy is from the top? Then we also need to communicate left and right, which means we need to communicate to our internal stakeholders, which is our team, and we need to communicate to our external stakeholders, our vendors, our suppliers, our clients, our customers, our regulatory bodies, et cetera. Who needs to know? And we need to know beforehand, what can we communicate internally and what should we communicate externally? Because sometimes they're not the same.
Who do you think should be doing the communication?
Well, internally, we need to use the entire chain of command in that organization. Everybody needs to be communicating up, down, left, and right. But when we talk about external communications, organizations
probably via lawyers, right? You should have a lawyer do it.
I don't know. Should we? I don't know.
I would say no. Normally, most lawyers are going to say yes. But what lawyers say? Lawyers say no comment. That's not really communication, right? So I'm going to say no. I don't think so.
I have a few attorneys in my family. I don't want them mad at me, so that's why I punted that one to you. But generally speaking, what really you want is someone that has the skills and is comfortable communicating with people on the outside, on the external to the organization. They have the ability to think on their feet. They have the ability to communicate under stress, and they need to have the ability to answer questions and know what not to answer in both, that's a preparedness, preparing before the communication event, but also just to have an instinct to say, yeah, we'll just get back to you on that, or to know we have to communicate them on this, and we have to be honest, and we have to be transparent, and we have to communicate in good faith. We may not be able to answer all the questions, but we have to be communicating in good faith. So that's pretty much, the, some different points for a response that are good, but I'll just go over a couple more generalized that don't kind of fit in those categories. And that's, we need to be flexible in our response. We need to be able to change. We need to be able to pivot. We need to be able to move based on a situation. It's especially true in cybersecurity events and other man-made events when there might be a bad guy on the other end who has a vote in how we're responding. So we need to be able to change tactics. We have to be able to recognize we can't reinforce failure. If something doesn't work, we shouldn't hit it harder. We have to be able to, again, pivot and change strategy and tactics. We have to be able to coordinate with our partners in blue sky, which means that's an emergency management term that means before the event. We have to identify who our stakeholders are and talk to them beforehand. Because a lot of times people make assumptions, especially one of the greatest examples is law enforcement. People make all kinds of assumptions about law enforcement, what they will do, what they won't do. And unless you talk to them beforehand, you may have wild assumptions as to what their role is in your response. Another one is asking for help. When you need to know when it's time to ask for help, and who do you ask for help beforehand? And we need to be able to think non-traditionally, especially when we're asking for help. Who can be our partner in helping this? Is it members of our community? Is it members of government? Is it other members of the private sector? How do we ask for help, and who do we ask for help from? And we need to bring in as many perspectives into that conversation as we can, because a lot of times, for instance, I come from an emergency management background in the government, and when we counter a problem in the emergency management sector, 90% of the time we look for a government solution to a problem, and we don't often look to a private sector solution set because we just didn't know they were there. We don't know how to communicate. It's not that we didn't want to bring them in. It was just that's our worldview. So we need to cut through that worldview at all levels to say who can help us. And I know I'll wrap it up here in a second. Is one of the keys to being an effective response is having a coordination meeting, during your operational period. We in emergency management called the command and general staff meeting. Keep it short. I've seen we've had 12-hour operational periods, and I've seen command and general staff meetings go on for 4 hours. So the people who are supposed to be responding to the event have spent 4 hours talking about what they're going to do in 12 hours. So they've cut a quarter of their time because they want to talk about it. So be effective, be short, be concise. And finally, my last point, and I'll be quiet here, is one of the keys, and this is, if you take nothing away from an emergency response here, please take this one away, is you got to take care of yourself and your team as a leader, because everybody wants to run, they want to run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week until they solve the problem. It's generally not possible. You need to make sure you get rest. You need to make sure you and the team are getting days off. You need to make sure people are making doctor's appointments. I've seen that. People forego doctor's appointments and have really negative outcomes, because this could be a marathon. the response phase may only be a few hours, a few days, but the recovery effort from this to put it all back together again might take years. So we need to be able to manage our workforce and make sure everybody stays healthy and in the fight. So that's all I have. And I know I went on a little long, but I'll turn it over to Jake.
I would say too, one thing I would add to the communication that I've learned, I've done a lot of cyber responses. Most of that's really what I work with is cyber issues, privacy, data breach issues for the most part as an attorney. But one of the things I have really come to understand is that when you have a cyber attacker in your system and they've done things, for instance, ransomware, you're busy trying to figure out how to get them out of the system, right? Be careful with where your communication channel lies, because if you're using email, they very well may be there and watching and seeing what you're doing. So be very careful with what communication methods you use for your team. It might mean using a cloud-based resource that you've not used for nothing else other than an instant response. And so when you think about it, you probably should know what that was in advance, right? You need to know to have it teed up and have people invited into it. So it's another step in the process that until you go through it, you really don't know. But once you've been through it, you realize, oh gosh, do we really want the bad guy listening to what we're saying? We're not going to pay the ransom. We are going to pay the ransom. That's really not what you want to let them know. Next slide, Jake.
Sure. And before I advance to the next slide, Heidi, I'd like to let everyone know that, that was some great information by Seamus, great points also made by Heidi through Seamus's presentation. After the webinar, after this meeting, feel free to reach out to any one of us with any sort of questions for follow-up. I'm sure all of us would be more than happy to have, a more lengthy discussion with you on how to develop some of these plans. So again, I'd just like to reinforce that. Our last slide will have our contact information on that. But thank you very much, Seamus. And we're going to move on to Heidi now.
Okay, thanks, Jake. And really, I know I can speak for all three of us. If you call us with questions and just how I get started, that's not a billed thing. So don't worry. We're not going to charge you. We are passionate about what we do, and we want to see people do this well and get started on the right road. Part of that is I love to make visual aids for you to keep. So when you get this deck, I think this is one that you want to keep. And it shows you where we are right now. It's happened. You've done 24 hours worth of response. It's great. Now you have to make sure you stop the spread, contain the problem, contain the pain. Then you need to make sure that you have things that you do what you need to do to get them out of your system. And then you need to talk about how you're going to recover. So this is what we're going to be following next. Next slide there, Jake. So incident response after the panic, the process, stop the spread. Name your pain. What the heck just happened? And is it done? Where did it hit? What really got affected? And then restore functionality. And it's important to understand that your business oftentimes just can't come to a grinding halt, depending on the type of business, but most businesses can't. It's one of the reasons why small to medium-sized businesses, over 80% go out of business within the first 6 months after an event. Why? They lost a lot of customers, maybe their brand, which Jake's going to talk about as well. But also they just stopped doing business. And that doesn't work very well for most companies. So you need to understand that all of it's probably happening at the same time. So it's complicated. Next slide, please. So first, we're going to talk about stopping the spread. And we're going to talk about it in two ways. There's technology that you bring to bear, and then how this affects people as well. So technology, you want to make sure you understand all the affected systems. I'm going to use the example of ransomware because it's really easily defined in some respects. You are going to know which systems and where in the system you have been encrypted. I don't know if most of you have ever seen that, but encryption, when it happens, it's a very usually disruptive event. Usually people come into work, turn on their computer, and they can't get in. Sometimes they see a ransom note. We'll talk more about that, but You need to know, is it in the network? Is it the servers? Is it on the individual devices? And here's why it's important, because if you've got ransomware in your network, you know it's there, it hit a server, it hit something. People then come in and turn on their computers, it's going to hit their computer. So now it's not just in the network, it's hitting the devices. So you need to do what you can to block that next incursion. So that's something to be mindful of. You want to make sure you figure out all the systems and the devices, and then you want to make sure that you block their connection further into the network, because if they're infected, you don't want that infectious agent. Think of it like COVID. You know somebody has COVID in your home. What do? You tell them, stay in the basement, don't come up. We'll put the food at the top of the stairs maybe, or we're all going to be gowned up in hazmat suits while you're around us. But you're containing it, you're breaking the connection, you're insulating the rest of the environment from the risk. Then I always think this is such an easy step, and people balk at it at times, but you want to force a log out of all users. And you require immediate password resets. Why? Because you're kicking the bad guy out of the system, because the bad guy doesn't have your password reset. So you're going to reset passwords, and it's going to, at least if not completely eradicate, it's not going to probably eradicate all the impact, but it can stop the further incursion if there's an element of a user coming in and doing some of the malicious activity. And then you're going to want to do a coordinated shutdown, so that devices can be taken, things can be partitioned off as much as possible. And the next step can begin of cleaning. You have to get to the cleaning and the removal of malicious code. So personnel, you also have to stop that spread. Oftentimes employees are aware of the problem. They don't know that it's everybody else in the company's problem. They may think, I screwed something up. Oh my God, I'm going to get fired. So be mindful of the fact that your employees are probably if it's touched them at all, they're probably very concerned. They're very worried. They don't know if they did something. So you want to make sure that if you send out communications to your employees, that you let them know that this is not their fault, that they're not being fired, that they're not the only ones, and that you're in this together. I say this is that trust moment with employees. It's frightening for companies, and companies want to go, no, don't say anything, don't tell anyone. Nobody needs to know this. But truthfully, by being honest with your employees and saying, something happened, we don't know the extent yet, we're figuring it out, we'll keep you advised. It's like, and I will tell you something new that I've learned. Ransomware is the biggest thing hitting everybody right now, right? Well, these ransomware groups actually now know how to find your employee, and they will call them directly, and they will harass them, and they will scare them. So they may not tell you that's happening, but you maybe want to say, if you're contacted by anybody associated with what we're experiencing, please do not engage with them, but let us know immediately. You also want to have that crisis communication protocol that you should have from before created. Seamus talked a lot about this, Jake too, but you want to make sure that internal communications go through HR to the internal team, but with the IR response team, instant response team's approval. It's not something that should be done without that management of the response part of the process. And then for those external communications, they should be through the company designated channel only. Usually I indicate, and I know Seamus does as well, and Jake, name a spokesperson. Please, please, please do not do the attorney, because like I said, we say no comment, but also when an attorney makes a pronouncement out, it tends to have some legal gravitas. And you don't want to have every utterance that's made during the beginning phases of responding to an incident held to be something that the company can be legally obligated to, own. The other thing is the CEO. CEOs are not necessarily, and actually very, very rarely would I ever suggest a CEO. Why? You want to make sure that the CEO isn't making pronouncements for the company either. It might be a paid person who does this, But I don't know if you've ever seen the CEO for one of the companies in West Virginia, when there was the pollution of all the drinking water for a large part of the communities, stood up on the news and spoke for the company while he's swigging down bottled water when nobody had water, swigging the bottled water and complaining about what a hard day he's had. I think the people who didn't have anything to drink had a harder day. It was very tone deaf. It got really terrible results for him. But really, honestly, have somebody who's used to doing this, knows how to speak. And then remind oh, go ahead, Seamus.
I was going to say one of the other things is making sure that your spokesperson and your external communications team is communicating the external message internally down to the lowest level. Because people that are in your organization, their family members ask them questions like, "What's your company doing about this?" And they're not. If they say, "I don't know," that's even worse, right? Or if they have a wrong message, that everybody in the organization knows. If they could ask a question, if there's a generalized question that they can say, "Hey, we're really working on it. We're working hard to fix the problem." They need to be able to have that freedom to communicate with their friends and their neighbors, and that's something very, very basic, but at least have a basic answer out there and say, "Hey, this is what we're doing."
Absolutely. And you know what? It's so common every single day, businesses, organizations, my doctor's office, I just got the breach notice that all my personal information was just breached. I don't know when it happened. I just got the message this last week. So this happens all the time. You don't need to be ashamed it happened to you. It's virtually impossible to avoid forevermore. So just understand that, giving that information out there builds that trust. And I've had clients that communicated immediately to all their customers. And that really built trust with their customers, that you won't hide the fact, you help us protect ourselves. It's a great message, worked out well. And then really remind your employees that they should not be posting out on social media at all on this, and be very mindful of the social media stream for the corporation. Because what happens is the social media stream for the corporation or the company, there's commenting. You want to lock commenting down so that they can't comment, because those comments are out there and you may not have time with all the instant response to be checking the comments, and people might be putting horrible things in there. And guess who else looks at your social media? The bad actor. Next slide, Jake. And then this is the other part, is understand your internal capabilities. Your IT team is not an InfoSec team, and neither of those are the forensic investigators that do this every single day. I am not a forensic investigator. I have no skin in this game. But what I am is a lawyer who's going to have to help you respond down the road. And if you're HIPAA, if you're a regulated industry in any level, or there's personal information which has been released, you're going to have to do something with that. And therefore, it's so, so, so important to get the right people in there to copy and preserve. It's like a crime scene. You don't let a marching band walk across the crime scene and then say, okay, now we'll get around to picking up evidence. Essentially, when people start running around going, oh my God, we can't get into the system, they start obliterating very valuable evidence. If you have an incident, get a forensic preservation team in there ASAP. They have specific technology and they have specific skills that allow them to forensically image the systems, take them, you move forward, they take them, they can figure out what happened in the system. This is where I can get the evidence to actually determine and report out as to what we did. Did we do it right? Did we do at least a really good try at making everything, going through the process of responding? Perfection's not achievable, but you know what effort is and reasonability is. So that's what we're looking for. So it is also not really appropriate to ask IT to be able to grab logs and analyze them. That may not be what they do, but also know the first time you have a cyber incident, the next time you have a cyber incident, you are way more prepared. A lot of times I find out that the logs were only maintained for like 24 hours by the time you got around to doing the preservation. They're gone. Things like that are somewhat ephemeral and we need to grab them. Next slide. And then how we're going to figure out all these things that happen. There's really three primary areas. They sound super techy. You're going to get the slides. They're not that techy because I'm not that techy. I've gotten more techy, but I'm sure really not. So endpoint analysis. We want to know what tracks were left behind. Do we know when they got in the system and where they got into the system? And then we need to gather those artifacts that show that they were in our system by putting in some sort of different codes that forensic investigators know what to look for. We built a timeline of when they got in our system. I will tell you that when you've had a cyber incident, they have been in there longer than you ever want to know. It used to be really long, but even a couple weeks is quite a long time to be within your system, monitoring, checking, finding things out about the company that you don't want them to know. And so we need these pieces that come off the devices that they entered into. And we want to capture from each device as well as from the network itself. And then there's the binary analysis and investigating malicious binaries. Doesn't that sound techy? I love those. Actually, what's a malicious binary? It's the code. It's the code. Binary is code, 0101. So basically, if it's ransomware, that's code. It's code inserted into the system. And we want to determine what that code was designed to do. So there's two ways to do it. We can either find the code, and we can't always do that, find the code and take it out and have it analyzed, reverse engineer it to figure out what it actually was doing and what it was functionally able to do. And the other one is to take that code, stick it on an isolated system, spin it up and see what happens. By doing this, I was able to, with one client, find out that they'd screwed up the code itself before they inserted it as a malicious code. And it was not configured to take the data before they encrypted it. That's a win for me. It means there's less, risk that anybody is going to have that data. It's already just, you're going to have to pay to get it decrypted potentially if you don't have a copy. But because they hadn't taken the data, that made it a lot easier for us. So now you know a little bit more. And then there's enterprise hunting, just figuring more out about which ones were compromised and how they were doing and how we can neutralize. Next slide. And then, like I said before, you're probably during all of this trying to restore business, trying to keep going, trying to sell widgets and provide the services that your company does and why the company exists. So you want to take everything you learn in this investigation phase and put it into how you're going to stop the pain, how you're going to stop the spread, and how you're going to restore. But ultimately, you're going to have to take those devices, if they have ransomware on them, off, wipe them, restore the operating systems, and then changing all the accounts, password accounts for the users and the administrators. And then once everything is put back in place, you're going to have to find where you have data to put back on the system. So put it back on the devices if you have good backup data. But I will tell you, backup data is not like just here's my computer, it's back here. It's a much more complex process. So don't wait until the systems are clean to figure out what you have as far as your backup data. Next one. Jake.
So I'm up next.
You are.
We purposely front-loaded this session with all of the best information. So I'm kind of here to sweep up the floor, and I'd like Seamus to take himself off of mute, so we could have my couple of slides. We can kind of discuss them like we did yesterday when we were refining this session for you all, because I think the back and forth that we had was really valuable. Both Seamus and Heidi added a lot of points to what I have to say, points that were garnered through the experience that both of them have had in their professions, the years of experience that they've had. So I'd like them to jump in at any point during when I'm talking here to add additional comments. So let me just advance the slide here. So one thing that both Heidi and Seamus enforced was that, communication and protection of your brand and company's name is the responsibility from the boardroom all the way down to the server room. And, down to if you have interns that are monitoring your Twitter accounts, it's their responsibility as well. But, kick it all the way up to the CEO. That doesn't mean that the intern that's, running your Twitter account should be speaking for the company. Heidi and Seamus addressed that in their slides. You need to have a designated speaker. Who's that designated speaker going to be? Well, you need to have that ironed out in your plan well ahead of time. And that means you need to exercise these plans, as Seamus said, during blue sky times. It's not going to be, an hour after the incident, we decide who speaks for the company. It needs to be decided well before.
And whenever possible, that spokesperson should be the same person through the entire event. So
Right.
the media gets used to talking to the same person. There's a consistent message through the entire event. So whenever possible, select somebody who could has the bandwidth to be the spokesperson for the entire event.
And an individual, could possibly set up a communications channels with, the police department, a reporter at a newspaper. That way, when the incident does happen, you have a direct line to the media, you have a direct line to the police. It's not, a free for all. You have that relationship already established. Heidi, I think yesterday we were talking about that, how you need to reach out to law enforcement ahead of time to find out what they could do to help. And then that dialogue is already established and they know that you're concerned about something. And, there's also the chance that they're more willing to jump in and help and protect your brand and reputation, because it can say, hey, company X over here, months ago, they were planning to deal with the situation. They contacted us. They were hit. Here's what they're doing. They're trying their best to restore functionality.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And yeah, and don't be afraid to call law enforcement. They take your information. You may never hear anything else, but they're working on taking down these groups. So really do. And the other thing I would say is I've learned a lot on the, there's a lot of blogs put out there by these ransomware groups. It's quite a professional endeavor, and they actually will publish your name if you've been one of their victims. And then all of a sudden the media who are monitoring these blogs will call. So be ready for it, because it'll happen. And it doesn't have to be a bad thing. We just usually say, we've got it in, we've got normal functions going on. We're not concerned. It's good. And then you don't have a big news story. But if there is something, you're not the first one, remember, and you're not going to be the last.
Right. And there's not a cookie cutter solution for this either. What we're offering, one thing we'd like to stress is preparedness on this, that you need to get these plans ready. And, you could have a variety of plans, a Rolodex of plans to turn to when something happens. But there's little room for error, especially when dealing with customers, because, if you happen to take the wrong step left or right, you're in a minefield, and that could be it for your brand. But, that's why it's important to have these things ironed out in the beginning. You should operate, I've bolded out these words here. You should operate with the thought that eventually you will be compromised, that you will be hit by an incident. It doesn't matter if you're a company of 10 to 10,000. There's a very good chance that this could happen to you. So you should function like that. You should prepare for that to happen. I believe I've addressed everything on this slide, so I'm going to jump over to the next one. Heidi or Seamus, did you want to add anything to this?
I'd like to add that one of the things to think about is when you're doing your planning pre-event and when you're actually responding to events can happen in a cascading impact. So you might be responding to a hurricane, and a bad cyber actor may take advantage of that compromised situation and attack you then. So you have to be on your toes with cyber 24/7.
Yeah, and COVID is an exact example of that. As soon as COVID hit and everybody went home, there's a lot of risks from working from home that weren't there in the corporate environment, in the traditional environment. Those people got really busy and figured out how to capitalize on all of the weaker systems we use when we work remotely. They went gangbusters and got very successfully were able to infiltrate a lot of different enterprises. But, I hear a lot of small to medium-sized businesses say that we've never had an incident. You know what? Usually I want to know then, what have you done to see if you have ever had an incident? Have you been detecting it? Have you been looking for it? Because after the fact, the forensic investigators could probably point to any number of incidents. They may not have been huge, but they were there. You might not have gotten a ransom note. And if you ever do, they're hilarious if they weren't happening to your company. They're threatening, they can't spell, bad grammar, but you know what? When you get one, it's the ugliest thing you've ever seen.
And one point before I advance to the next slide, the last point down there, about the technology and the threats evolving. It's my hope that, your incident response plan isn't sitting up on the shelf in your corporate office covered with dust, over the past couple of years when you had, cubicles filled with people. Now we're 2 years in, everybody's working from home. Hopefully you've pulled that out. You've refined that response plan to meet the new challenges that we're all facing with, employees working from home or remotely at a distance. Hopefully they're using company equipment for work only. They're not accessing social media sites like TikTok, on company computers. So have you addressed that? Has that been built into your plan? So again, the threats are evolving. There'll always be something new.
One other thing about that, when you have a threat happen and you have an instant response plan, you have a call list, right? Remember, you're probably not going to be able to get to it on your computer network. Paper is crucial in this situation. Make sure people have copies of that and that it shouldn't be locked up in the building. Go ahead,
One
Shane.
of the things that I've done, one of my little tricks of the trade here when I evaluate exercise, and some of them have been fairly substantial, is I like to stage the room where the command staff is and put their plan right on the middle of the table. And over 90% of the time, they don't even open the plan that's right in front of them, and they discuss what could be in the plan and what that couldn't be in the plan. And when I tell them at the end of the exercise, the plan was sitting on the table. It's something about human nature. When they're in the response, they don't want to open the plan. So you got to really enforce that. Know what's in the plan before an event happens, and don't be afraid to crack open the plan and look at it. And if your plan's too complicated to read during an event, your plan is probably not a great one.
It's like not reading the instructions.
Right, and that's about communication. If you can't communicate your plan out to people, that's an internal communication. That's an issue. All right, so this is my last slide right there. I said that already in the beginning, and it's been reinforced by Heidi and Seamus during their presentations that the company leaders have to be on board. Let's see, exercise. We all know that we need to do it, but we never seem to do it. Please find a way to build exercises into your quarterly, annual functions, however you want to space them out, tabletop exercises to test out your response plans. And then I'll jump back up there. After the incident happens, post-incident, you're trying to restore your reputation, develop that social media strategy, encourage your social, followers on your social media networks, to communicate out support for you if you trust them to do that. Again, that's about establishing the relationship early on, during the blue sky times that Seamus was talking about. That way, you have that relationship with, people in the community, community leaders that you've talked to before that say, hey, yes, company X over here is right. They were hit by an incident. They're trying to get back on their feet. I know they can do it. And then finally, the NIMS structure for management. Seamus, would you mind speaking a little bit on that, since I see a FEMA.gov address on there? Yeah,
I can talk 2 minutes on it. I mean, I could spend days or weeks talking about this stuff. It's a pretty deep rabbit hole, but basically what NIMS is National Incident Management System. How do we respond to a country to events, whether that's a hurricane or a cyber event? It basically gives the rules of the road for the government and the private sector of how we're going to respond as a country to something. And FEMA's got some really great independent study courses, both for the incident command system and the NIMS, just to give overviews to companies who are not used to, organizations not used to using it. It is a little public safety focused, but essentially what it does is it gives you an overview of how to organize in an event. And if you have any questions on NIMS or ICS, we'd be happy to talk you through it.
Awesome. Okay, so we've got about 7 minutes. Thank you, Heidi and Seamus, for helping me out with my slides there at the end. So here's our contact information up on the screen. I think since we have a couple minutes left, if we each spend a few seconds or a couple minutes each before we close this out or ask for questions or comments, we can explain what each of us do. So let's go ahead and start with Seamus.
Yeah, thanks, Jake. What we do here at Meridian is as I said in the beginning, we're a crisis management and risk mitigation company. What we do is we help organizations before, during, and after an incident happens. We try to get you ready so that we can mitigate the event. We help both public sector clients and private sector clients try to overcome the challenges they might experience in a disaster.
Okay, and I'm Innova Law Group. I'm going to explain my frog, because people always say, what the heck's with the frog? The frog, I chose the frog because frogs exist in really harsh, dangerous environments, but they know how to adapt to their environment so that they can actually still be productive and reproduce and live their lives. So that's just like your companies, your clients. Life is tough out there right now. There's a lot of threats out there. You have to be prepared. You have to evolve to meet these threats. It's not as simple as it once was. I'm an attorney. I also am a privacy professional, and I do a lot of InfoSec. I write the policies. I help the teams understand what they need to change, how to be more secure, how to handle risk. But the beautiful thing about working with these two guys a lot, we don't do the same thing, and we know what we do and we know what we don't do. And I think that's the important thing when you pick a partner, is that making sure that they understand what they do and what they don't do, and how to partner and be part of a team, because that's how we thrive, as being part of your team. Jake?
Awesome, thank you. And again, I'd like to reinforce, we put our contact information up here. Feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn, or, you can send us each an email if you're more comfortable there. And if you need to find more information about who we are, again, we've made our websites available there too. So my name is Jake Hayes. I'm the Strategic Communications Specialist for Norwich University Applied Research Institutes. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization affiliated with Norwich University. We provide cyber exercises. So we do tabletop exercises in a distributed environment. We also offer secure network monitoring, custom consulting, and research education on critical national security issues. So we partner up with folks like Heidi and Seamus, and we try to solve problems. And we do it because we care about the companies in this country, and we care about our country. And that's about all I have. Heidi or Seamus, did you want to wrap it up?
No, I just appreciate everybody.
Your platform's great. Seamus?
I said, everybody, just appreciate everybody participating, taking time out to join us this morning.
Absolutely. Any questions? If you didn't ask them now, you're not going to be stopped from calling us or even just emailing us and letting us know what your question is. We will get the answer.
Definitely. Great. Okay,
Thank you, everyone.
I think we're going to wrap it up for the day. Again, thank you all. Have a great rest of the week. And again, we're here if you need anything.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.